The secret is there's no secret. Consistency over intensity, progress over perfection, fundamentals over fads, over and over again. Stay focused on the primary target, and that is to surprise and delight the future customers wherever we are in our life cycle.
Welcome to LaunchPod, a product management podcast brought to you by LogRocket. Today, our guest is Michael Park, product coach and advisor who previously served as CPO of BombBomb, a video messaging and software company. On today's episode, LogRocket's VP of Marketing, Jeff Wharton, talks to Michael about his 6 lessons from scaling product from 0 to 25 million ARR, the nuance that comes with the founder mode discussion in relation to best leadership practices, and what a self-imposed sabbatical taught Michael about product leadership. So here it is, our conversation with Michael Park.
All right, Michael, thanks for joining us today, man. I'm really stoked to have you on the show. You wrote a really cool paper on 6 lessons to scale product from 0 to 25 million ARR. Yeah. I got a whole bunch of questions I want to ask you about that. But first of all, just thanks for coming on the show.
Oh, thanks for having me. I appreciate to be here. So,
yeah, this could be a blast. We always like to kind of start with a little bit of a warm up before we jump into it. So my favorite question, this has been one of my kind of favorite experiences I get to do as we're doing this is, so, famously in my family, they still don't know what I do or how my job works or anything like that. They've accepted it now. They no longer fear from my career, but they don't know what I do. With that in mind, I'm sure you have somewhere in your family, right? Family, maybe an uncle or an aunt or a grandma, or like maybe you have kids who kind of, don't also have that background in tech and product, I'd say, is even a little bit harder to describe at times in marketing. So like, how do you describe to that non-tech person in your life what product management is? Like, what is product? What do you do?
Sure. That's a great question. First what I do is I take tech out of it just to begin. Yeah. I'm like, I build things. I build widgets, because they understand that in the conventional way. I had in my career, the first part of my career, like at least getting my feet wet, I built hard goods, So first I start with builders. I support builders building a product to get to market. It happens to be a digital product, so don't let that freak you out, Aunt Carol, And so once Aunt Carol can understand about the widget that I build, I get to actually talk about the technical side of it, how unlike a hard good, when I used to build hard goods and publishing products, I used to have inventory out in the warehouse. And so my general manager would say, you made a mistake. You ordered too many, what you thought was hot, or you listened to that buyer who led you down the wrong way, right? You have too many widgets in the warehouse. I start to talk about the fun of digital. Like, what is the equivalent of too many in the warehouse in the digital space, right? I think that's kind of a fascinating concept. What's over inventoried in tech, Yeah. And so basically, to answer your question simply is, my job and my team's job is to prevent those who build things from building the wrong thing. When I do my job the best, they're building the right thing, and we can get into what the right thing is, and preventing the wrong thing or over inventoried in the warehouse. What do you think when you hear that?
I think that's a good way of putting it, right? Like I love that one because it ties it to something real that people can understand really well. That's, I think we had one on a guy named Akash Gupta recently. He's kind of a thought leader in the product space. He came up through product and now writes about product and makes content. And he had a similar way of looking at it but he was describing it to his kids in his version. And it was great because he related it back to, the apps you play on the pad when let you do that once in a while. And I always feel like the best way of describing this is tying it back to the person's context of their life. Right. Yeah. So I love that one too. I think that's a really good way of putting it, especially if you're talking to like an aunt and uncle who, that generation grew up slightly before us and a little bit before all this stuff came out.
I mean, it's a little bit negative because it starts with it's like building the wrong thing. And then it elicits the question, well, what's the right thing? And that's a great conversation. How do we define the right thing in tech? And we talk, and the weird thing, tech debt always comes up too. Like, right? Like, cause like that's the wrong thing and it has implications. Again, last time when I was in hard goods, we had a plan Z, and that was like TJ Maxx. When everything failed, we closed it out to the discounters.
Yeah.
In tech, who's the TJ Maxx or the Ross? For tech. And it's the engineers who really feel the blow of my are bad decisions. You know what I mean? So yeah, I really get that. So
Yeah, I mean, to carry the metaphor forward, right? Like if you buy something wrong, like in your retail or physical goods, and you make something wrong, you order too much, you can sell it down to a discounter. There's ways to kind of liquidate your inventory.
Yep.
I feel like the problem with digital is your inventory is more about time than anything else. So, and last I checked, there is no way to liquidate out the time that you spent wrong. It's just gone forever. So it's not higher stakes, but it's definitely different stakes, and there's no kind of way to slightly absolve them.
And Jeff, don't you see not just the time spent in, let's say, coding in the simplest language, but also the proper care and feeding infinitum until you make the hard decision to cut it. Exactly. It's both directions. It's time, and my goodness, to be an engineer who has to care for something in the code base and there is no passion behind it, first with customer or business, that is, that's a burden. That is really a burden, and often relegated, and properly so. People are resentful. Like, I'm caring for this code base that has no joy, or certainly from the marketing side, I don't see it on the glossy flyer. What the heck? I get that. So
yeah, no, I mean, we can talk about it a little bit later, but I always kind of go into one of our big tenets here in LogRocket is, money you can raise, you can, fix problems, but we are huge on focus because you don't get more time. The only way to get time is you can step function do it by hiring people, but that's expensive and has its own problems. But like with your set team, you have X time. You cannot buy more. There is no privilege that will get it for you or money that will make it appear. So time's valuable. So I love that thought. But one other thing I always like to talk about is, I feel like product has gone from this thing that was, I mean, you and I have been doing this long enough to remember like Tom from the movie Office Space, and he was, a product manager and just a joke. He was a joke of the movie. Now it has become this really hot area to work in, and everything's product driven, product led. But with that has come product is a hot topic to talk about. Everyone has theories and takes and opinions. And with that, I always like to ask, like, what is one thing in product going on now, or a topic or a belief or a process that people are kind of holding or pushing that you just think is wrong? Or what's something that you would change in how product is done, you think is just broadly, counter to the best way to do things, that you preach and maybe is kind of counter to the popular opinion?
So Jeff, I'm going to answer this probably maybe in an unusual way, just a little bit of context from my life. I stepped away. I exited BombBomb in the summer of last year for what I needed was a hiatus, like a sabbatical. And I had been, it was my fourth startup and launching. And so your question is almost what I was trying to get some perspective in my sabbatical was this topic, this kind of search for the answer. And yet in my career, I'm sitting in the audience of on stage at SaaStr, and I'm hearing some of the companies that we respect the most. And I'm hearing the founders, of course, it's their fourth time, which in and of itself is noteworthy. So somehow failure is part of success, which is fascinating, not a surprise, but not often, captured, because I don't know how that would go. But failure, but I felt like in the last 8 years, certainly before and during COVID, I felt battered by the latest book or the latest podcast. I felt fatigued. And I just will say, I'm not separating myself. I jumped into it. I participated, but I got tired of, I just needed some perspective and wanted to get back in my career with, it's kind of some of the motivations on why I wrote this. Like, what works? I love this saying that the young, and however you want to do that, whether that's age or career or thinking, but the young are very good about things that change, and the old are very good about the things that don't change. I love that. And so I took a year off from this topic, like kind of purposely. In the middle of that, talking about another thing, I have a close family member beginning the process of dying. And so this question, it's a very interesting question to me, because I've had some time away from the tempo, the thought tempo that I participated in. And I put books on the desks of my team out of the desire to grow both our team and our thinking and of course our revenue. So I guess in a way, to answer your question, I am actually I've been away from it from, I don't know, a period of time. And I realized, my goodness, that's kind of a taskmaster of sorts, a standard upon which I always was disappointed that my team or myself or the business wasn't growing to. And last thing on this, and I'd love to get your comments. Sorry, and I don't mean to be obtuse about answering the question, but I always felt like once I jumped in, let's say it was product-led growth, by the time I got a modicum of tempo, of some sort of quasi mastery, I felt like there was a thought that was contrary to some of what the hard work that I just got the momentum. And I felt, and just recovering from fatigue, on this topic. What do you think about that?
So it's just the general pace of the amount of kind of information not flying at you from a job in product, but actually about the practices of product itself and how to do it best and how to keep up, a little bit of almost keeping up with the Joneses.
Yeah.
So it's really interesting. I'm going to relate this back to an experience I just had. This has been one of those kind of things that I think in general I've felt and been unable to articulate. What you just talked about is there's constantly talk about practice, the best practice or the way of doing something or a technique and it took me years of operating before I kind of understood this. And it's the same in marketing. There's always some new tool or some new thing or some new technique, right? At first it was, product-led growth and near bound selling and ABM. And I feel like marketing and product really parallel each other. Now at LogRocket for the past 6 years, I have had the chance to work closely with our product team as well. And I feel like I've been sucked into the hole you just described. We did an event in New York a couple of weeks back with a whole bunch of product leaders from across New York, just incredible group of people. I was really, super lucky to get to talk with all of them. But we had Jeff Charles from Ramp. He's the VP of product over at Ramp, come in and talk. And, famously one of the fastest growing startups in history, if not the fastest, and just their velocity in product and their focus on solving problems in such a great way, is one that everyone there knew about. And what I found to be the funniest or the most enlightening was people kept asking about specific practices or, are you agile or, semi-agile or, all these kind of nuances about technique and things you would learn in books. And his answer consistently was just like, I don't care. I don't know. I'm not sure, man. Like we're focused on solving user problems. We want to discover what are the most important things our users are facing, and we want to solve those problems. And we want to do that quickly and effectively, and we want work to be high quality, and that's what we do. And we think that works really well.
Yeah.
And it was just what was great though was you saw almost this like burden lifted from the shoulders of so many people. I actually talked to Non-Yu, who's the head of product over at Linear, and he was on the show a couple weeks ago, and he was there that night as well. And it's fine. I caught up with him after this talk. And one of the main things he said is like, listen, Ramp is 1,000 people, Linear is about 60. And he was like, it's great to hear because what he's describing is how we operate right now at 60 people. And it's great to hear that like, this is something I don't need to worry about. What we're doing now can scale to 1,000 people as long as we focus on solving user problems. And that's great because now I don't need to worry as much about, am I doing these things right? I can focus on solving user problems. And I think Jeff, that's the biggest thing, right? Is just solve the problems.
I resonate so deeply with what you just said. And I'm not, plus, one of the things that guides me in this process and would guide a team, I'll kind of read you this quote because I think it really speaks. It says, the secret is there's no secret.
Yeah.
Consistency over intensity, progress over perfection, fundamentals over fads, over and over again. There's parts of that I could pull apart, as we should, but I think some of the things is there's a real energy in what you just said and some of this language to keep going and to keep and stay focused on the primary target, and that is to surprise and delight customers or the future customers wherever we are in our life cycle. So
there is no tool that's going to magically solve it. There's no book that's going to magically solve it. It was actually kind of just to stay on this topic for one more minute. I have a colleague who I talk to, very regularly. And one of our big discussion points is there's these couple companies that always appear that just have growth above and beyond anything else in the market, just like come on the scene, and like Ramp is one of them, right? They came on the scene and just out of nowhere, 0 to 100 million in ARR and then 200 million in just like what seems like almost zero amount of time. And you look at it and go like, how did they do that? And we had this consistent argument back and forth, me and this person, about how, and their gut feeling was like they found one channel that really worked well, and they were able to sit there and throw money into it or throw resources into it and really just scale it. And that didn't hit with me. I don't ever think there's a magic bullet. That didn't make sense to my brain. And the great part was having Jeff there and talk about this. I think I realized it definitely wasn't that. He talked about how deeply they are obsessed with like every deal they lose. They go through and they understand why they lost it. How did it relate? What happened? What was it? Feature? Was it sales process, et cetera? And then they bucket these things and look at their product every month of like, how do we solve these user problems so that so we never lose that way again? And it's just, I think the magic bullet is, like you said, it's consistently caring and grinding and just keeping on top of that and just iteratively getting better over and over again.
Let's go a different direction. So like we're using, as we should, I am not naive, revenue or pace of revenue as a success metric, as we should. I mean, we're here for business. But what about the business who grew not as fast, but is cash flow positive, and their focus is on their team? And that, how about the business? Let's say I call it blue collar SaaS. Where about blue collar SaaS that that it may not grab the attention of most, but the engineering team, the product teams are content and growing in their career, and their tenure breaks the norm, right? It isn't in the 1 to 2 years, it's in the 4 to 6 years. I think if we were to hear that, someone would be like, what's wrong with those employees? Are they not go-getters? So I love the revenue as a metric, but what about contentedness? What about growth? What about the feeling? Because I believe I believe the best employees I've worked with in 25 plus years are those who feel and see directly their contribution to where the business is moving, where the founder's moving. We could use all of these interchangeably. So that's another thing that speaks to this. And so when we look at, back to my point, fads and books and the latest topic does have the ability to fatigue the ground troops, the builders. And we as leaders have a responsibility to prevent, out of our own maybe idleness and kind of, for just that we need to grow. I've learned through hurting the feelings of people. People can only go as fast as they can go. And when a new book comes in, I remember a PM of mine where a new book came in, and the look on her face, I thought was going to be like, thank you so much. It was resentment. And, I have a responsibility there as a leader to hold what I think is the next good idea and really think about that deeply. I guess there can be fatigue there.
I think this goes back to, when you're to goals. Right. It's okay if the goal is you're going to build a company that's going to be great to work at, and you're going to, build a little bit slower maybe, but it's going to be, fantastic work-life balance. And you're going to get to the same point. Or your goal might be, we're going to build the fastest growing startup in the history of the world. Neither of those are bad goals. It's just, you got to have a goal. But I think the biggest thing is, how do you communicate that to the people you bring on? So you bring on the people who want that, not to keep going back. Sorry, this was a very recent event, and Jeff was, unbelievably impressive and had some great things to say. But he talked about when he's hiring people in, part of it is being really communicative, almost anti-selling. Like, this is going to be hard. We expect this is pace. If you want those things you want to achieve really fast and be just super driven and obsessed, come here. If you don't, this is probably not the place for you. And I've tried, that's something I've tried to do historically as well, with like hiring our SDR team, or growth people or anyone in the marketing, being very clear about expectations. And you can, as long as you're hiring the people who want that, you can't make people want those things, but you can hire for the people who want the same things that you do.
Remember when we heard 10 years back, oh God, it's probably even longer, but remember when we first heard the Zappos model where they paid employees to leave, and everyone was like, because it wasn't about paying people to leave, which it was, but it was about this. It's kind of the spirit of what you're talking about. It is this, rather than selling in, it is like selling out, and as a result, I guess that really challenged the predominant MO, and it really said, really use this type of language to get people who are clear on the vision. And also there's a part of them that goes, yeah, I want that,
Right.
let's go, so I love that.
Well, it's the same way, right? Where, again, Jeff from Ramp saying, oh, we don't care about that stuff. We're not worried about the latest trend of product or like agile versus semi-agile. We solve user problems. We're focused on doing it quickly and high quality. That's all we care about.
Yeah.
And just seeing the burden lifted from all those people at the event going like, oh, it can be that simple. It's the same way almost, where it removes the stigma of, opting out of a company, because one of the big stigmas is money, right? You don't have a job. You don't have the money to pay for your life if you're not, in the very fortunate position to be able to take time off without pay. So it removed that downside risk or that stigma. It made it okay to opt out if it wasn't the right place for you, which I thought that was genius. Like, absolutely.
Totally agree.
It was so smart. So Michael, I'll be honest, I could go on and on about this forever, but you also wrote this paper that I really want to talk about. So we're going to switch gears on this and dive right in, because there's 6 points. I don't think we're going to cover all 6, but there's a couple in here that I thought really hit home with me. I want to hear more about them, please. So for everyone who's listening, you wrote the paper called 6 Lessons to Scaling a Product from 0 to 25 million ARR. Mm-hmm. Who'd you write it for? Like, is this for the new product leader? Is it more for people who maybe are like on that path but want to get to be leadership? And was this knowledge you wish you had going into your first product leadership role?
Yeah. So, I think after the fact, I discovered a lot of different audiences, but initially, like, what was the impetus that created like the front end momentum to write it? It was for me. It was out of my insecurity. I'm on sabbatical. I've been very focused in my career and building my career. And I find myself, I'm kind of on a self-imposed sabbatical and hitting the wall of, oh my gosh, did it matter, honestly? And I think it's important as a leader, as a chief product officer, that to communicate, absolutely, same insecurities. What do I do now? My goodness, you hear about this. I get the job of walking the dog in the morning. So I meet up at the park with a couple of retirees, and I found myself going, when you retire, did you lose your mind, as we hear people do? And I'm not retired in any means, but to go from on to off, especially in that kind of 0 to 1 startup culture tempo, it's almost like an adrenaline, So I started to dip a little bit. And remember, I talked a little bit about the fads. And so I started to ask the question here, what do I know for sure? What do I know? And again, I can't be the one who said, there is no secret. That's not my intention. I wanted to speak it very introspectively. What worked in my experience that I can kind of rebuild a little bit of confidence that what I did mattered, because I think it always comes back to people and who did I help and who did I serve, whether it's customers or those on my team. And so that was the motivation. After getting it out there and having response, I've had product founders who are in the process of saying, is this the time to bring in the new product leader? When is the right time? I've had product leaders saying, I love product, but I can imagine maybe doing a head of product. Where do I begin? So that was secondary and tertiary, but the first was really to really step back, because it's a privilege to be off and have a sabbatical. I know not everyone has that. And I didn't want to squander the time. And I wanted to say, let's just do some reflection on what I think was successful and what I found to be true. So that was the motivation on it.
Nice. Cool. So, with that, lesson 1 gets right into it, right? There's no like intro here. There's no fluffy kind of broadness. You are right into lessons. And number 1 is transitioning from founder to new product leader and product market fit. And kind of maybe this shows just the type of company I've been at or my background of where I have had my experience. But is this something that you see commonly, where a product leader is brought in kind of pre-product market fit? I've always thought of this, and maybe it's my own bias thinking here, but like I've always thought part of the job of being a founder is, you are the owner of that vision. So don't bring anyone in until you've got PMF. If you're not there yet, you're not going to be able to hire someone who's going to get you there better than you can.
Yeah. And you're right there, by the way. I think that, but I think, listen, oftentimes when a product leader is brought in, at least in my experience, I can't speak, but in my experience, there's a little bit of fatigue and resentment in the founder, in the entrepreneur. It's like a key ingredient I'm looking for. It's like, I love parts of it. I'm being told, and we'll probably get into this when we talk about founder mode. I'm being told by my board, or even my close, or even my CEO group. I'm being told, going back to that, fads and expectations. I'm being told I should do this, and so there lies in what I was trying to get in the article is, how do we keep the very best parts of the founder? How do we keep this vision that you spoke to? Let's just call it the heart as a placeholder. How do we keep the heart? And yet the place that they find draining and taxing, how do you supplement, not take over, but supplement? And that's the key verb difference, is not to, it is just to add to. And so, yes, I agree with you. The founder who was initially motivated by the idea, but also I think even more important, is the closest in that moment to the customer.
Yeah.
Thinking almost like this ability that, you could ask, so what do you think the customer is going to do? Either they were the customer, either they're one of those very skilled entrepreneurs who can have that sixth sense of it. We've all met he or she who can just smell what the customer is, but I think it's all the same. It's their proximity and understanding of the customer is very close. So to remove that from the organization to the product, especially the building effort, marketing effort, that would be a miss. And so, but my question to you is, what phase of what is PMF, first of all? When do we know we have it? Okay, that's the first question in it. And my article was talking about, what do you do when you're bootstrapped? What do you do when funding's limited? How do you know that you're on the right path, whether it's the founder or whether it's the early product leader? How do you know? Because I've been able to get to the point of data maturity that I can say, which was a glorious day, but it took years to say, now they're going to come in the funnel here and they're going to try these three things, which if they continue to do these in a span of 30 days, we know that they're more likely to not churn and to retain. That is really sophisticated. And the moment you do it in Excel, you're going to have someone on the finance team, even someone on the engineering team say, do we know that though? Do we know that?
How sure are we?
How sure are we on these numbers? Do we have user data and sales data connect? Do we have financial data and user behavior connected really though? And so it depends. What hardening of product market fit do you ask? Right. And I was trying to really get to, what does someone do in the beginning to take heart and to keep going and keep building in the right direction?
Yeah, no, I think it's fair, right? There is a point at which you need a product leader. And I kind of read this in the context of almost, you can bring in an outside one, or you can have I've been to companies where actually the founder brought in a CEO so they could focus on product, but then they also brought in a product leader, like a VP of product. And that job was more about the operational running of the product team, not the vision. I think that back to our early conversation, there is no magic bullet. It's right. If you're focused on solving user problems, what's the org that's going to set up to do this the best way? And that might be bringing someone to help you run product. It might be, bring in a CEO, kind of executive head to help you run the company. I think it's gonna be different for everyone. And probably the core thing is, how do you look at what you need and understand where your strengths and weaknesses are, and what allows you to crystallize your vision that clearly got you to where you are and keep the company going forward?
I think the key, but to synthesize, it is a really important time in a scaling business when the founder, she comes in with the vision, has the relationships with the customer, she has built a product that customers are renewing, and now for whatever the reason, she believes that she needs to take parts of the product role and needs to bring someone who can care for it exclusively, allowing her to get onto other parts of the business. I think what we're saying though is, it's you have to be very specific, very selective on your choice here. Because if you have, I try to capture it in that article, you have engineers who are in a lot of ways the technical founders in that scenario, who have developed a very strong working relationship with her. And so if you come in and do that unwisely, you might attrit, some of the people who know the code base the best. And it's not about knowing the code base, which is important. It's about being able to get to quick solutions for customers the fastest and not having this long tail, so it's a really precarious time, and something I encourage founders to have some criteria on. And I discussed that in the article. For the sake of time, I won't be getting it, but one of them is bounce back factor. So this new product leader has to have this bounce back factor that I've seen early founders and entrepreneurs. They just have this innate ability to lose and bounce back. There's not a long post-mortem. And so there's some key personality traits that you want to look for in a leader to help basically achieve your goal of, I want them to tackle parts of this while I do other parts of it. So I'm a big advocate of the right hire in that moment, no professional manager in that moment taking it over. I would wonder why the founder's retreating anyway. That would actually be a red flag for me. Why is there retreat in the early phase of the business from this? In a way, I should expect as a product leader to have to, wrestle with you in a one-on-one, taking parts of it away. That's more common, and that's health. I think that's health in that.
So right there brings us to, you brought professional manager, and that I think is a good segue into one of my, favorite topics to push on lately. The idea from Paul Graham and Brian Chesky and that whole crowd of like founder mode. And does this kind of concept of bringing in a product leader, especially that early in the org, does that kind of run counter to that idea of founder mode? Or like, I guess, first of all, what is your thought on this whole idea before we even get into the applications in this context?
I'm more positive on founder mode from my experience, but again, there's such nuance in it. It's a language topic, right? Mostly in my experience in the phases of business I've worked in, would be in the front, this is something that I have seen for me as a benefit, is this in every aspect of every department involved. And so again, going back to my earlier comment, when there's if there's an easy letting go of the reins to a professional manager, first of all, in my experience, that doesn't happen a lot. It happens maybe, like you said, maybe the CEO, maybe it is, if they're kind of a sales and marketing driven founder, they might, say, ooh, I got us here through hustle, but I need some process. I don't understand, it depends, but usually that's the motivation. It's structural. Right. So it's more, could we call that maybe more head, and they have the heart. And so first of all, when a founder is aware that there's a shortcoming, or maybe, like I said, they've failed a couple times in business and promised themselves, I will not delay. I will supplement where I'm weak. First of all, there's a tremendous, right? I think we can agree, there's tremendous self-awareness and strength there. Right. That's someone who I want to follow. But I've always been a person who still invites the founder. To me, I've never struggled with it. I've seen the power of it. But as a professional manager, I've always welcomed that input because it is my rocket fuel in the first, year of being a product leader to get some momentum, because they have pretty good instincts. Now, what happens, and I discuss this in the paper, is when there is some efficiency in the product team, the founder begins to, I've seen a couple times in my experience, retreat from the customers, or voice of customer begins to diminish. And I think this is the real concern. And now you're like, what's your system within the organization now for bringing voice of customer into roadmap? Basically, that's really product-y terms, but like, what are the customer sayings, and how do you know that they want what you're building? And I think this is where the retreat of the founder, I get a little sensitive, because someone needs that, and we need to make it a process. And what happens when your product team has 7 teams running, and 100 engineers? How do we do that? Again, that's a little overly simplistic, but those are some of my concerns that I've seen.
Yeah. No, my problem with the general essay was it's a little too binary and a little too reliant on, the Brian Chesky level founder. Yeah, you're Steve Jobs, you're Brian Chesky. Yes, but how many of us have had the fortune to be born with those skills, or be in the position to develop those skills? Absolutely. Beyond that, I also kind of, maybe it's me as, in my role as a hired in executive, kind of chafing at the idea of calling professional managers some of the best liars around. It's but so maybe there's just,
that hurt my feelings. That hurt my feelings.
Maybe it was a little bit like, oh, ow, knife in the back there. But really, I think what it is, but if you find that you've hired managers who are gaslighting you and are lying and are not doing what's right.
You hired wrongly.
You hired wrong. This is not like, I think the answer is, and this came up, we had Akash Gupta on who writes a lot about writes a lot about products, and he was a product leader. He was VP of product at Apollo. He came up through like multiple companies. He was a founder at one point. And we had this discussion, and he has this great kind of like almost three archetypes of product leaders. And I think that maps very well to other functions as well, where it's not, I think founder mode is a good thing to have on a spectrum, but it's also understanding where you do have trusted managers and where you can kind of pull back a little bit, where you have to be more involved. And that's probably going to rotate throughout a lot of the business. But on top of that, you can't just be founder mode. You also have to hire in people who can help. And part of that criteria I've realized is like, hire people who care about the solution that you're doing. Like they want to be part of fixing a problem. Hire people you can trust. But then also, like, if you have found that you're the only one who understands the vision, you need to communicate better as a founder, right? You need to figure out how you communicate to these people. Like, what does great look like? What is the expectation? What is the mission? And how does your part fit in so people can make independent decisions without you? And I can't imagine that Chesky is involved in every single minute detail. Like there's definitely some that rely on people making great decisions in his absence. And that's where I kind of founder mode. I think the paper goes a little too binary. I think in reality, the best places are hybrid.
Two things to add to this, but we're same page here.
Yeah.
The first thing is, what I got from the paper and why I'm like, oh, I'm positive. My first read was, I'm positive because I saw it. I initially got caught up in the manager thing because this is my role. And I'm like, oh, but when I thought about it, I really want to go back to, I really think it's what I've experienced. Again, just what I've experienced. I don't know. I can't speak for every business, but what I experienced is there is a temptation for the founder to retreat. And I really feel for them. They're like, you need to bring in people. And so how much they step away, that is, I have a lot of empathy. And like I said, I've seen it done well and I've seen it done poorly, like a lot of things. Let's go back to one of my first mentors, Annie Danielson. Yeah. Here you have someone who is running a business. She is in home decor. She is a creative professional. And she knows through this fatigue, she's hearing from external sources, she needs to begin to give aspects of her job away. Okay. And when Annie was a great mentor of mine, when I asked her because she had to hire me to take out some of it, when I asked her, tell me, like, what is that like? And she said, because the article also speaks that, founders should treat it's like their children. And so Annie, being a mother, being a professional, being this multi-layered human, had such a perspective. She said, owning a business, running a business, she had done it for almost 20 years. She said, and also being a mother and having kids at that point when she's telling me in college, she's like, as a parent, you go through phases of the child is highly dependent on you, when I can remember this. I tell my friends with little kids, I'm like, I remember when my daughter Laurel wasn't in the room. It's like, there's a problem. You're always scanning. Now I just dropped my daughter off in her second year in college. And, that starts to, if you look at those two extremes from high dependence to independence, and of course, making mistakes in both, right? Making mistakes early on with too much independence. And then of course, now, I'm like, dad. But Jeff, isn't that and coming from Annie was so noteworthy that it's hard as parents, we struggle throttling what we give away, what we entrust, what we keep, let alone the parts that I like, that I love, that define me, that give me great joy. Again, I come back to, it's an art. I can't believe that there'd be one approach. I just haven't seen that in any aspect of life. But I thought that the article was trying to speak to maybe removing too much of one's parenting too early from the child, which is not the employees. That's inappropriate to call employees.
It's the org.
But the business, and the product. So there's a real art there, right? What do you think when you hear that, like the parent-child versus the business founder analogy?
Yeah, I mean, as a parent of two very rapidly growing young boys, I still want to make my, I got two that are 3 years apart. I still want to make my older one hold my hand on the way to school, but there's no way in hell he's doing that. Like he's like, Dad, I get the pre-teen eye roll. My 8-year-old's right on the cusp of wanting to do that, and he'll still do it once in a while, which is great. But I like the idea of the org as the actual child. And I've been in leadership roles for a while, and this has been something where I know what Paul is saying here, right? Like, you don't want to step back. Even within marketing teams, I've been guilty of kind of that, of like great people, and you step back and you give, not enough input maybe, or you don't communicate what the mission is, or how things are going to work to ladder up to the big company goals. And you do see it goes askew. I do think there's value. You want the founder involved. You want the people who understand, you want leadership involved in the people who understand that big mission and that big path, that everything done at the IC level that flows up to company growth. You need that guidance, and it's changing all the time. So you need that mission understood. I think the concept is right. It was the kind of way it was described of being very binary and kind of demonizing one half, where it's more, you want to build this culture where you're involved and you're pushing people and you're setting expectations and you're communicating. But at the same time, you do have to trust. You do have to be on the road of building those skills for the team and for the org, where they can, operate more and more independently, so that you can continue to grow the org on your end as well. Like, you need the room to work on, right? You can be working in the business or on the business, is like the kind of trite thing to say. Yeah. And you need the room to work on the business, but you can't do that if you don't teach others how to work in the business. Yeah. So it seems to be like a spectrum is the best way to put it.
If I were to write the article in closing, to what, again, just through my lens, through my language, through my lived experience, it would be, on the top of your to-do list, founder, should be, what is the level of support for this business this week? And bring that to your consciousness, and bring that to your what's appropriate, trying, just like product, trying different things, loosely held ideals changed weekly, strongly held beliefs looked at weekly, as we do in product. And that would be what I would say is, don't just listen to the board and say, you must retreat so you can get some space back to raise capital. Yeah, in that process of raising capital, you could be doing harm to your business, as the org is just not ready yet to listen to voice of customer. Anyway, that's where I would say on that.
Yeah.
Hope that's helpful.
It's an interesting topic, right? I think there's a lot of opinions that can be talked about, and we could, again, go on forever here. I do want to cover one last thing before we're out of time. You talk about roadmaps in your paper here, and this kind of balance between rigid and squishy. I guess, kind of first off, before we just dive in, can you kind of explain rigid, squishy, what they mean, and how do you balance or solve for the right style there?
Well, the trigger warning on the roadmaps is roadmaps, and again, going back to these fads that we've gone through. So wait, my joke is, do we like roadmaps or do we not like roadmaps? That's really, I'm like, are they good or bad? I don't know where we are right now as of October the 4th, Right. I don't know where they are, but listen, but on the serious note, why is it that every org, it's one of the first deliverables from a new product leader that they're looking for? Because I think it's it's the impetus of why they're hiring someone, is like, we got to get our stuff together. Yeah. No one knows what's happening. And that's typically, again, talking about how we exacerbate, there's two efforts, that when there is no formal roadmap, it is the marketing team and then consequentially the sales team going, we don't even know that these features exist, and yet we're trying to differentiate, in sales calls, So this is getting frustrating. Okay. So that's one exacerbation. The other one is whoever supports the customer success saying, we didn't even know this feature was built. This, of course, isn't the most extreme, And so normally when they hire a product leader, which the paper was kind of focused in on, was like, that's the problem to solve. But like anything, I think I think this is kind of the theme of our time together, Jeff, is there's a pendulum on both sides to be in error. Yeah. And this is this squishy versus rigid, Let's just tackle rigid, What I really want to communicate, and I think this will help, is kind of executive-driven, time-bound. That's a key one right there. Time-bound releases have a side effect, and they are appropriate in times. Again, when the executive team is close to the engineering team, they can feel and empathize with some things. But if that posture is too long, there are some side effects, and in the paper, I talk about some of those side effects for the sake of time, I think there's an innovation drop, because the engineers don't get to participate in the solution, and resentment fits in for many reasons. So that's one idea. So when I say squishy, I just mean, I might have said squishy. I meant rigid. When I say rigid, I mean time-bound, business determined, apart from the engineers in the room, the product team in the room. On the squishy is usually, in my experience, was when we did the opposite. We had Agile was in full motion. We were shipping things. We were like, like everybody else. Oh, Spotify ships, Amazon ships every 12 minutes,
Yeah.
That's great. And good. And Amazon, you're amazing.
Yeah. And when you're a $1 trillion company, maybe you can also do that.
Great. It's like, it's aspirational. We actually started shipping good stuff, 7 product teams in my experience in my last effort, every 2 weeks, shipping great stuff. And who started? It was the marketing team going, oh my God, okay, listen guys, I am so frustrated because there's so much stuff here, but I have no idea what's coming out, and so let alone, like I said, so it's a pendulum swing. So I tried to, but at the end of the day, it's like, do you need a roadmap? Absolutely. You need a product roadmap. Between the lesser of two evils, between rigid and squishy, I'm going a version. I'm just saying this. Bring the builders into the room. Let them participate in it. I love this. A mentor said this. People don't fight against their own ideas. Let them participate. People don't fight against their own ideas. Let them participate in the crafting. You're going to get a lifting contribution from the team. The builders will have an input. You're going to get innovation better than keeping them out of the roadmap and what's defined. And more importantly, your supportive teams are going to know what's happening and do the best they can to really, because engineers eventually, here's what, I don't know if you've experienced this through marketing. At the end of the day, who's going to get disappointed is going to be your engineers going, we're building this stuff, but it's not being used.
Right. Or we don't know why we're building it.
And we don't know why we're building it. We got to solve that. That is the product leader's responsibility to make sure that's clear and that there's a process and a system behind that is what I was trying to capture.
Yeah. No, and I think that makes sense, right? And there's a spectrum. And I would say, at the same time, you start to get, you talked about getting sales and marketing kind of going, like, we don't know what is going on. I think, the solve there is, one interesting thing I've realized is product is not just the job of product, right? If the whole company is not obsessed with solving this problem, you're probably doing less than you could, right? Like I meet with our product leader, who's also our CEO and co-founder at this point, Matt. I talk to him every single day. I listen to sales calls. I'm talking to prospects and customers. I have feedback for him on product. I'm talking to product managers. I have feedback for all of them on product, to point probably of annoying them at some level. I talk to our sales org too and pull insights from there. But I think, right, it's, the job there is distilling on the product side. The job is distilling that as a stakeholder and right. Making the right decisions, taking that into account, but not just blindly listening to that, right? You want to listen to the market, but but vision as well. Yeah. But I do think the org here operates better because, product is, we have a capital P product leader, but product is the job of the org, and everyone needs to be, using their vantage point of the org to make it better.
I love that. That's true product evangelism right there.
Yeah.
Like in a nutshell, when you look at a scorecard for a CPO, for a VP of product, it says product evangelism. That's really the spirit of it, right? For example, we use one of the things that's great. One of the questions you had was, what is a tool that you use? We use Chorus AI. And when on an AE hears something with just a customer, they would say a code word that would instantly kick that transcript to the product team and product board that they would have to listen to. Again, that is a beautiful example of a sensitivity from the AE level to solve one of their problems. We're not competitive on features here. So that's the problem they need to solve because I'm not getting deals. But then using systems and technology to get that in front of the people who decide what are we building and when are we building it.
Yeah. No, we use Gong here. Same idea, just different tool. And I've said, like, after having this, I won't ever work at a company that doesn't have something like that again.
I agree.
Because it's great that we've also built a culture where AEs surface this stuff to me and they'll come to me and say, hey, I just had this call. I think this is a shortcoming, because they know I'll then go, discover with them it's important, push to product. But they know I'm a pain in the ass. So they'll come to me and let me advocate there. Yeah. But also I'm listening to calls. Like, it's based on my podcast half the time when I'm not, listening to other podcasts. I treat that as one of my podcasts to listen to stay informed. But no, I think the point you made about like, they'll move faster. We had a woman named Nancy Wang on several, months ago. She's the SVP of product over at Hilton Grand Vacation. And she talked about this actual process of moving from, I think exactly what you described is like, if you looked in the dictionary next to rigid, it would be what she talked about as the previous iteration, which was very like, she called it led, plan, build, run. And they moved to much more kind of product led and having, they're not PLG, but like product led in how they were building to build, and listening to users and customers, and IT pushback and engineering pushback at the beginning, saying like, oh, this is going to take more time, it's going to be slower.
Right. I hear that
but
a
then
lot.
They were bought in. It was better features. Customers were more engaged, and engineers quickly realized like, this is fantastic. Like, we're listened to, we understand what we're doing and why we're building it. And her feedback was very quickly, the whole business saw they were moving quicker.
And that's just a testament to her leadership. That speaks to Nancy's leadership and being a really gifted leader.
Yeah. And she'll say it wasn't just her, right? It was the head of IT who was willing to give up, that part of it. It was the CEO who understood the value. It was it was, again, that leadership understanding. At heart, a company is about product. You have to distribute it. That's, marketing. You have to sell it. You have to, there are steps you need to do, but at heart, I feel like the point of a company's being is to solve these problems, and that's product. Michael, I'll be honest, this has been one of the most fun episodes I've done.
Really?
I could keep going for a long time.
The energy's good. No, thank you.
Yeah, I'm a bit of a talker, if
Me
people
too.
haven't noticed, but I think we're kindred spirits there. But I want to not steal your entire day.
It's passion.
Yeah, I love this. Like, I love, how do you build a great product and the company around it to solve problems? Like, my firm belief is if you're solving problems for people, if you're distributing it, if you're doing a good job of messaging it, and people understand what you're doing, why you solve their problem, and you're there and they trust you, and you're selling them not at a stupid price, and like, you're going to be successful. At the heart of it has to be a great product. You have to solve a really important problem first, and the rest has to coalesce around that. And if you can do that, that's success. And so I love this stuff. So I'm so happy I get to do this, regularly. I get to talk to people like you, and this has been a blast, man. We got to catch up again soon. Absolutely. But if people want to pick your brain more, or find out, first of all, read the paper. Go onto Michael's LinkedIn, read the paper. It's there. It's great. 6 lessons to scaling a product from 0 to 25 million. It was a really good read. It's quick, but it's informative. But if people want to follow up, is LinkedIn the best way to find you, or how can people get in touch?
Yeah, LinkedIn is Go to the Park, but also personal kind of CV websites, gotothepark.me. The last name is Michael Park, so Go to the Park. So, yep.
Awesome. I love it. I love the cleverness there. I thought that was really cool too. So, all right, man. Well, it's great to have you on. Thank you. Hopefully you can come on again. Have a good one.
Take care.